Good morning, everyone. Today's meeting of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee is called to order on this day of October 28, 2025. Welcome, everyone. Agendas of today's meeting are at the entrance to the meeting room. Please remember to turn off your cell phones. To ensure a complete record of the committee's actions, we ask that each individual wishing to speak clearly state your name and spell your last name for the clerk. We ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. At this time, I would like to ask the board members to introduce themselves and state the fields you represent, starting from my left.
I'm Michelle Chenault, and I represent the Community Development Board.
Christine Bond, representing low-income residents.
Good morning, Frank Cornier, representing home builders and affordable housing.
Good morning, Mike Menino, City of Clearwater Council Member.
Linda Byers, city resident.
And I'm Robin Fiel, and I represent residential lending as it deals with affordable housing. This is the third of 4 meetings of this committee. I think our discussions so far have been very productive. I know we have a lot to discuss today, so let's get right to the agenda. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes of the committee's meetings on October 14th, 2025. May I have a motion to approve item 2.1?
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. The main item on today's agenda is to continue our discussion led by Amanda Warner from Wade Trim. Ms. Warner, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, so today we are here for our third Affordable Housing Advisory Committee meeting. So after this meeting, the next meeting will be a public hearing. So this is our last workshop format meeting. Just to go over the schedule again, as a reminder, we started this process back in August. We are meeting to discuss the LHIS, or Local Housing Incentive Strategy Report, through September and October. At the conclusion of this meeting, we'll transition into the next phase of the AHAC meeting series, which will be to hold a public hearing to approve the updated Local Housing Incentive Strategy Report. After that, the report will be taken to City Council. That City Council meeting will occur on December 4th. And then once City Council approves the LHIS report for submittal to the Florida Housing Finance Corporation, then that document will be submitted to the state, and that document must be submitted by December 31st. So that's the timeline that we're working for. And then after December, the document will be incorporated into the local housing assistance plan, and that will occur in the spring, and into May is ultimately when that local housing assistance plan has to be submitted. So that's the schedule moving through the end of the year and into spring of next year. As a reminder, for meetings in total, we are here today, October 28th, and our next meeting will be on November 18th, so please mark your calendars for that November 18th public hearing. Just to review the values, principles, and vision, we discussed these at the last meeting. The committee approved all of the housing values except for C. C was modified to change the term workforce to residents. So now affordable housing value C is revised to read aspires to have housing that fits the city's residents. And this was a recommendation at our last meeting. The affordable housing principles were also continued. So there were no change to these. There are 6 affordable housing principles. And then ultimately, the affordable housing vision, which combines all of those, that was also kept in its original form from the previous year's report. So the affordable housing vision is that the city of Clearwater will incentivize the development of a diverse supply of housing that is safe, accessible, affordable, sustainable, and energy and cost efficient, that blends into the aesthetic character of all the city's neighborhoods, proximate to public amenities and employment opportunities, and which supports an inclusive community and the diverse needs of residents. All right, so the local housing incentive strategies. So as a reminder, we're talking about both barriers to affordable housing and then incentives to combat those barriers. There's a multitude of barriers to affordable housing. Some of them are just provided as an example here. But there's 11 incentive areas that are required to be reviewed by Florida statute. Those 11 are listed on the screen on the left-hand side. And then over the years, the AHAC has initiated several other incentive areas, and those are listed on the right-hand side. In total, there are 16 incentive areas discussed in the Local Housing Incentive Strategy Report. So on September 9th, the committee met at their first meeting. And at that first meeting, there were several barriers and incentives identified. And on your screen, you'll see a summary of those. So the first one was lack of affordable housing supply, lack of housing options for senior citizens specifically, renter cost burden and the high cost of rent and utilities, real estate taxes and insurance costs for home ownership, land use and zoning regulations, and then there were a couple incentives discussed. One was accessory dwelling units, and the other was infill density to improve opportunities for affordable housing in urban areas. So on October 14th, at the second meeting, the committee went through all of the Local Housing Incentive Strategy Report recommendations from 2024 and considered whether each recommendation should be continued, modified, or removed. The committee also considered whether any new affordable housing incentives not covered in that report should be added. So today we're going to review the discussion that occurred on October 14th and then see if there are any other changes to the recommendations moving forward to the public hearing phase on November 18th. So on October 14th, the committee discussed the request for expedited permit processing form that the city has and identified through city staff's information that the permit application now tracks the number of affordable units. So on that form, there's a place to mark the number of affordable housing units as part of the project. City staff also provided additional information regarding the typical number of affordable housing applications received and review times. And I believe, Lauren, was that something that you were looking at in between the last meeting and currently?
Good morning, Lauren Matzke, Planning and Development Director. I was able to get some data yesterday regarding those projects that were listed as certified affordable housing, and we were not necessarily meeting the target that's in the strategy, so I would request that that remain. The benefit of data is first you can assess how well you're doing or not, and then discuss, what changes need to be made to do better. So that is a conversation that I can have with my team. We're not missing it by too much, and my guess would be that if we were missing it for affordable housing, we're probably also missing it for other projects due to some staffing shortages and, of course, storms and other things that we know took place over the last year. So it does give us a good opportunity to regroup. So, but like I said, we weren't missing it by too much. There's some that were, of the total that were pulled, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There were nine projects pulled. All but one were single-family homes. I know that was a conversation. We have the big project on Cleveland, which of course then comes through as a commercial permit as opposed to a residential permit on the building permitting side. And so our first reviews were completed between 4 and 8 days, business days, and our average for the second round of review was, there were 2 that were done in 1 day, a couple, or 3 or 4 done in 3 days, so that met the target, and a few others that were done in 4 days. The large project, just though as a point of comparison, the first review was done in 31 days, and then the subsequent re-reviews, so when they resubmitted information, those were done in an average of 6 days. One thing that they also pulled for me was the number of cycles, the additional re-reviews, but that's just a number, so without looking at the details of what additional information was missing or needed to be corrected, but it looks like it was about 2 or 3 re-reviews. So what we can do is kind of, what we do on occasion is reassess, what seems to be missing? Can we create better checklists, things like that in our department in the last year as a result of our business process study that we completed a few years ago, did recently publish checklists for our top permit types, and we're continuing to work on adding more information online to help our customers. Okay.
I have a question. Oh, go ahead. Mine's
go ahead.
basic. In general, you hear in the news all the time that people aren't getting, permits issued in a timely manner. And I know I'm being very general. It certainly may not even apply to you at all, so please forgive me if it doesn't.
Yeah.
But
You're right, we hear it.
But I'm sure you do. So since the storm has happened in the last now, going on 13 months now, is the city of Clearwater issuing permits, in general, are we having a backlog still? Is that still an issue in your department that permits are not getting issued in a timely manner for people that need them for the repairs? I'm sorry that's so general, but
No,
it's just.
that's okay. No, well, the one thing that Clearwater did that other municipalities did not do post-storm was we continued to issue permits.
Yes.
So some of the generalities across Pinellas County, of course, smaller jurisdictions, other jurisdictions took other approaches. We took a staff-intensive approach on the backside to reconcile our documents and continued to issue permits following our standard process.
Yeah.
So that was very beneficial, I think, to our community. But, some permits are a little bit more detailed than others. I think we still find that information sometimes is missing. And so, that can slow things down. And then, I also know sometimes, I'll just do another generic, sometimes contractors use us as the scapegoat. They may say that because there is enough news saying that permitting is slow. They may say that we're the slow ones, but we find sometimes when customers contact us, we'll look it up and we may have only just received an application.
Right.
Or, we provided comments back timely, maybe not, hitting our targets, but within a reasonable time, I think. And sometimes it takes the contractor longer to respond.
Yep.
So,
Thank you.
and this is not just post-storm. That is generally, what we see when we talk with customers or with contractors or others. So again, it's a continuous improvement opportunity on all sides. And if we find that there's just information that can help people, we want to get it available online. We looked at our applications not too long ago to try to revamp those and kind of guide people through certain bits of information.
Okay, so, all right. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Excuse me, in this explanation, it states that it just says affordable multifamily, but it doesn't include single-family residential or ADUs or any other. Is it just specific to multifamily under that expedited review, or it does include single?
Are you referring to a section of the report?
Expedited review permitting, it refers to multifamily, and it doesn't include single family. So I added single family, but also auxiliary dwelling units could be expedited as well. And then does a single family or otherwise affordable product have priority over other applications that may come through the process, or is it based on first ready, first served?
So I'll answer that last part while you're trying to sort through maybe the rest of it. When we talk about expedited permitting, the way that applications come in, our system automatically assigns a review date, right? Certain permits are 3 days, certain permits are 5, 10, 20, whatever it is. Our intake team has the ability to override that because they're doing the first pre-screening of information that comes in to ensure that it's actually complete. Because we don't route information to our reviewers unless we have a complete package. So in this instance, what we've worked through is having this signed letter that says it's certified affordable and thus qualifies for an expedited review. Our intake team would look at that and they would manually override the system and assign an earlier date. So when it comes to individuals, like all the different reviewers, we get work lists and it's, by deadline. And so their deadline would be earlier, so it moves them up in the queue.
Since affordable housing multifamily projects are a lot more complex than normal, does your staff have training on specifically to affordable that works in conjunction with the Housing and Economic Development Department when they initially do the review? So when it comes through the process and they recognize that, are they familiar with or somewhat familiar with affordable as opposed to others?
Well, the affordability is it's a pricing, so they would look at it just like any other standard project of its scale or size. So as I think we went over previously, we really, on the community development code, on the planning side more of, it's either attached or detached dwellings. When it moves into the building permitting, if it's more than one or two family is my understanding, it's either one or two family or it becomes more of a commercial project. So the larger building on Cleveland Street is labeled as a commercial project even though it's housing, whereas one or two families would be, there. And that's partially contributed to why the fee reductions were implemented the way they were several years ago.
Yeah, and to answer your question, I think one of the recommendations that fell out of, one of the recommendations that fell out of our last meeting was in the AHAC recommendations to include both single-family and multifamily in that expedited review recommendation. So we've gone ahead and added that language in there. I think regardless of whether it's single-family or multifamily, or as the city refers to it, detached versus attached in terms of the definition of those units, I think if it's marked affordable housing or affordable units are included, it's expedited in either case, so whichever type it is. So that leads us into one of the next items of discussion from the last meeting. We talked about that single-family versus multifamily definition and the detached versus attached units definition, and we also talked about missing middle housing and determined that under the city's definition, it's just a determination of whether it's attached versus attached in terms of those types of units. We also talked about all housing types and whether they were considered a project, which I think was one of your questions, and they are. So no matter what type it is, it's considered a project in terms of that application. And then we also talked about building example plans or plans on file. And there was direction to add accessory dwelling units to that recommendation to allow plans on file for accessory dwelling units as well. So what I'm going to do now is go through the recommendations that fall under the expedited review topic area and just review what the decision was for those. So for 1.1, which was to continue to use the request for expedited permit processing for affordable housing activity form, that was marked completed, it is being used, and the direction was to continue that recommendation with no change. So for 1.2, this is where we added single family to the list, just to clarify that it's really either type of project. So the Assistant Director of Economic Development and Housing and Permit Manager will continue to be the primary and secondary points of contact when submitting single family and multifamily affordable housing projects. And then it goes into the coordinating aspects of that role. So that was also, that was modified, but it's marked completed. And then 1.3 was to continue to improve customer service for potential project applicants, and that was also continued with no change. And then, yes?
I did have a question about the mentors list. Has that been concluded or completed, or are you still working? Is it in progress, or has it been receptive?
We have not completed that list yet.
Okay.
We have reached out to a few developers, but it's not something that's really taken off. So, but we'll continue to try.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and then with that one, given that information, we might want to amend the date on that. So it says providing a list of potential mentors experienced in affordable housing development by end of first quarter 2025. Would there be committee consensus to update that to 2026, given that it wasn't done in the preceding year? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So 1.4 was to develop by the end of year 2024 and annually update thereafter a brochure and other informational handouts to be published in a prominent location. This was completed, and the recommendation was to continue with no change, so that it will be continuously updated. All right, 1.5, this was another one that was modified. So this is where we added, this was the plans on file. We added accessory dwelling units as the type of application that can be kept as plan on file. So that was modified. All right. So the next topic area was modification of fees. So on October 14th, the committee discussed a few different things. So information was provided that Forward Pinellas is studying the multimodal impact fees and that the city will coordinate regarding those results. The city has adjusted fees in the past, and the city will conduct a fee study soon, tentatively in 2026. The city also recently decreased permitting fees for affordable housing projects by 75%. So that was a incentive that was recently implemented. So in terms of the modification of fees recommendations, 2.1 was continued with no change. That's that coordination with Pinellas County. 2.2 was also continued with no change, and that was to annually assess the financial, legal, and administrative feasibility of reducing, refunding, or redefining the cost of impact fees or permitting fees. 2.3 was also continued with no change. That was regarding continuing to implement the fee schedule of fees, rates, and changes ordinance. And 2.4 was also continued with no change, and that was regarding the payment of plan review and permit fees and impact fees utilizing state and federal funds designated for affordable housing. Yes?
I have a comment about impact fees because these developments have a huge impact on communities and so forth.
Okay.
And in the long run, it could burden taxpayers on increased taxes or increased utility cost to implement. I'm talking about years down the road, not tomorrow, you know, where impact fees, and I know they come from a whole bunch of different sources, but if there's not enough money to cover all of those, so impact, I don't mind review fees and so forth being, but impact fees, to me, it will burden the taxpayers in the future, and possibly, I know the city is supposedly built out, but I see continued development, and I'm just concerned about impact fees being 100%, unless they're funded under subsidy, which they possibly could. I know housing could probably address that better than I about whether or not impact fees can be paid, and I know in some respects they are. I just have a little bit of issue with impact fees, but other than that, I mean, it's good that they do it because a $600 a unit, 100-unit building is going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars. And it does add to the cost of construction, and I understand the concept, but then again, I'm concerned about infrastructure currently and in the future, and whether it's going to be a burden on the city to maintain that infrastructure over time.
I won't speak to subsidizing or anything like that, but in fact, impact fees are not allowed to be waived. Some entity has to pay them. So if it's a subsidy, some other funding source that's paying them on behalf of the developer, that's, you know, sometimes our CRA will pick up impact fees for a project instead. But statutorily, the city is not allowed to waive any impact fee.
But they can be reduced.
It would be through ordinance if there were some sort of reduction. I'm thinking of the Parks and Recreation impact fee. They recently went through a study and did an overhaul of it. They did not necessarily reduce for affordable housing. Specifically, what they did was modify their fee structure so that smaller houses paid less of an impact fee than larger units or other users. So any changes to an impact fee have to be done based on a study. That's my broader understanding of them.
And there's a study coming forth in 2026, I understand. No, isn't there or is that parking only?
For the multimodal?
So there's two things. So there's the Forward Pinellas Multimodal Impact Fee Study, so that's one thing. And then, sorry. So there's one thing, there's the Forward Pinellas Multimodal Impact Fee Study, which is ongoing. And then the study that you're referring to, which would be the city's fee study, would just be looking at the city's fee structures, not in conjunction with Forward Pinellas directly.
Okay.
So this recommendation, which I think led to that question, so this recommendation is really about assisting with the payment of fees using federal fundings or other funding sources to offset those fees. It's still getting paid, as Lauren mentioned, but it's using other federal or state sources to help offset those fees. So it's really a subsidization of it. Yeah. So, all right, so 2.4, so that was continued with no change. And then the next topic area was flexible densities. So at the last meeting, we discussed the Live Local Act and how the Live Local Act provides density incentives for affordable housing. The city also currently has an affordable housing density bonus that's in the Community Development Code. And the city also maintains a public amenities incentive pool as well. So in regard to the recommendations, so recommendation 3.1 was continued with no change. That was about continuing to provide the allowance of density flexibility for affordable housing. 3.2 was also continued with no change. That was to maintain specific parameters to grant density flexibility, so essentially criteria for density flexibility. That was also continued with no change. 3.3 was to continue to define the density allowance for affordable housing project as part of a pre-application meeting. That was also continued with no change. And then we move on to the next topic area. So the next topic area was infrastructure capacity. Previous committees had not made a recommendation on this subject. We discussed how the city is nearly built out and already has sufficient infrastructure capacity for infill development. So that recommendation of no recommendation essentially was also continued. All right. Excuse me. 5, accessory dwelling units. So the next topic area, the committee discussed how ADUs are already allowed in both non-residential and residential development, and that's through the comprehensive plan and the community development code. Co-housing and alternative housing types are not specifically addressed in those documents. However, missing middle housing types are potentially permittable as infill through the city's flexible development standards. And information about ADU permitting is available on the city's website currently. So looking at the accessory dwelling unit recommendations, recommendation 5.1 was continued with no change. That's continuing to allow for accessory dwelling units in non-residential zoning districts. 5.2 is regarding the implementation of the City Council's comprehensive policies QP 6.17 and QP 6.1.10, and those policies allow accessory dwelling units by providing corresponding standards for them in the Community Development Code. So that was also continued. 5.3 is providing flexibility for other alternative unit types. Again, not directly provided in either the comp plan or the community development code. However, potentially these units could be provided through the flexible development standards that the city has. So that was also continued with no change. And then 5.4 also continued with no change. This was to consider educational and financial incentives that reduce barriers to the rehabilitation and construction of accessory dwelling units. All right, so parking, yes.
I have a
I can go
question
back.
regarding the auxiliary dwelling units. Is there currently or any consideration given to providing a rental rebate program for ADUs that are constructed for low-income rentals?
What rebate? What would you say?
A rental rebate, rental.
Rental rebate.
Yeah.
So no, there isn't. You know, our team has discussed ADUs and the financing of them and/or potential rebates and those kinds of things. The challenge would be the monitoring of those units. So monitoring a homeowner that's having to rent out the unit, that's going to be challenging for us, but really more for the homeowner to do it correctly. If they're out of compliance, then they may find themselves, it could become a mess. So we've elected not to go forward with that. I mean, we're in support of ADUs, but funding for them just doesn't seem reasonable at this time. If we get a funding source that, something like ARPA again, then that may be something we could look at. But with our entitlements like CDBG and home and those kinds of things, it just, it doesn't connect.
There's some implications regarding real estate taxes, and too, for ADUs, it has to be considered because it can be costly to the homeowner.
All right. Okay, so the next topic area was parking reductions. We talked quite a bit about this. So there was discussion about the need to allow developers the flexibility to adapt a project to the specific site. We talked about parking reductions in the context of the potential for parking nuisances versus their effectiveness as an affordable housing incentive. And we also talked about the importance of proximity to alternative modes of transportation for persons residing in affordable housing, particularly persons with disabilities. So that was the discussion from October 14th. So recommendation 6.1 was continued with no change, and that was to continue to allow flexible setback requirements for affordable housing developments. 6.2 ultimately was continued with no change, and that's to continue to tie reductions of off-street parking requirements to the proximity and access to alternative modes of transportation, including transit, sidewalks, trails, and other options. And then 7, we talked about flexible lot configurations. So the summary of the discussion from October 14th was the importance of infill developments. Talked about issues of compatibility if development is not done well. And ultimately, there was direction to retain the clause while remaining sensitive to the character and context of existing neighborhoods. And that'll make sense when we look at the recommendation here. So recommendation 7.1 under flexible lot configurations was to continue to allow flexible lot configurations for affordable housing developments while remaining sensitive to the character and context of existing neighborhoods. So that was ultimately continued with no change. All right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Does the city deviate from standards in lieu of specific considerations for preservation or common areas or playgrounds and other issues and so forth?
So public amenities, flexibility if they're providing public amenities, is there any kind of reduction of standards if they provide public amenities? I think that's the incentive.
Not that I'm aware of. It would, anything would be handled, if there's a common area, that would be handled typically through the platting process. And so we would be looking at what's being provided, but they would perhaps be asking for smaller lot sizes as part of that. And we would look at the whole and see what's compatible and supportable based on our standards for lot sizes in the different zoning districts.
I think to that point, I have seen in other communities that tied to density bonuses. For example, if public amenities are provided or some kind of feature, then that is provided as an incentive for additional density, essentially, as a criteria if they're meeting that. So, okay. But not specific to flexible configurations. I haven't seen that necessarily.
Okay.
All right, modification of street requirements. So street requirements were not identified as a barrier to affordable housing. Previous committees had not made a recommendation on this particular topic area. And the previous committee's recommendation of no recommendation was a statement that because such standards are in place to benefit public health and safety, we do not recommend that the city utilize the modification of street requirements as an incentive for affordable housing. So that was also continued with no change. so the next topic area was pre-adoption policy consideration. So there was discussion about the senior executive team and that the reference to the senior executive team is currently obsolete as that process is not necessarily handled as part of that group. The current process is collaboration between the Economic Development and Housing Department and the Planning and Development Department. And legislative impacts are sometimes identified in conjunction with the city clerk. So that's the current process that's occurring. So if we look at the recommendation 9.1, the recommendation is as part of its annual reporting, the Economic Development and Housing Department will continue to review all regulations and ordinances that may affect the cost of housing. That was continued with no change. 9.2, there was modification to this recommendation. This was the removal of the reference to the senior executive team. So the revised recommendation is to continue the city's interdepartmental review process continue the city's interdepartmental review process through which any new regulatory instrument created in the city, ordinances, regulations, et cetera, or by related state legislation can be evaluated for its effect on housing affordability. So that was the removal of the reference to senior executive team, and I think we're missing strike through at the beginning of that, which was intended. So it should read, continue the city's interdepartmental review process through which any new regulatory instrument created in the city. So we'll get that corrected. So maintained by should be struck as well. Is everybody okay with that revision to take senior executive team out? Okay. Okay, the next topic area was inventory of public lands. There's quite a few recommendations under this particular topic area. Properties on the public lands inventory list, we discussed the current list, which was, I believe, last updated in 2023. Ongoing coordination between the Code Compliance Division and the Housing Division is occurring. So, for example, there's a list of violations and the potential for lien reduction or rehabilitation program funding is discussed. And then there's opportunities for stipulated settlement agreements process where some of those properties also may be addressed that way. So 10.1, that was continued with no change, and that's just the establishment of that inventory of publicly owned land. 10.2 is to continue to publish that list of publicly owned land. Yes?
Is there a statutory requirement on how often that list has to be updated?
Yes, it has to be updated, I believe, every 3 years, I think is the requirement on that.
Thank you.
Yes.
I did know on the website, there's a very nice list of public lands available, including maps and so forth. It's really good. However, I understand we're supposed to share that public lands with Pinellas County, but Pinellas County only listed one property on 49th Street. I'm not even sure if it's in the city, but
Okay.
there are no City of Clearwater public lands listed on their website.
So for that one, the coordination with Pinellas County would need to be improved. Okay, all right. Okay. All right. So for that recommendation, so for the link to Pinellas County's inventory on the city's website, is that sufficient then to create that coordination, that particular reference, you think? Okay. All right, okay. All right. 10.3 is to continue to make that list available to prospective developers and nonprofit agencies if they're inquiring about affordable housing. 10.4 is to identify properties having repeat code violations that may be suitable for rehabilitation, acquisition, or demolition for affordable housing. That was also continued. Yes?
In that regard, I'm sure there may be, may not, I'm not sure, you'd have to talk to codes compliance, whether or not there are any condemnations pending on properties that could conceivably be used for affordable housing. And also, we talked at the last meeting about code violations being waived rather than being paid. So I don't know if that was a possibility, if it was considered, but I'm sure you can address that better than I.
Yeah, the list that they provides, it's an entire list, a comprehensive list of all code compliance issues, including condemnations. And then also, we are working with code, we're gonna be working with them over the next year to develop a system that maybe includes stipulated agreements that will assist with liens and those kinds of things, maybe a reduction, it could be a removal. It just is going to depend on each situation. It'll likely have to go through their board for approval.
Mhm. I think it's a good option for affordable housing. I know in the past, there used to be, the value of the property was less than all the violation code fees. So people were just donating the properties, the lots and so forth to the city. I don't know what that situation is now, but you have to work in compliance with code for improvement of the homes through your rehabilitation program, and also those lots that are not being maintained or whatever. But that's a huge element in affordable housing, is working with code compliance from a different varieties of initiatives that the housing program offers.
Yeah, well, and before we were getting, a list of those, going through, looking to see which ones would qualify for a rehab program, so that was about the extent of it. And now we're actually working with code to determine if there's a way forward with, properties that may have large liens or fines that are associated with them, that maybe those could be reduced or removed so that we can do our work on the property.
Or need rehabilitation and educating the homeowner that those programs are available to them. If they're continuing to get violation for a roof that has a tarp on it or something, there's, alternatives to help them replace a new roof, waive the lien through the code enforcement board, and it would help a lot of people in that regard.
Okay. So the next one was 10.5, which was continue to monitor the policies and procedures for distribution of city-owned lots. So that policy and procedure is in place, and it has a scoring matrix as well. So that was also continued with no change. Yes.
I'd like to address the Green Print 2.0 timeline and congratulate the city of Clearwater for the performance in that regard. It's awesome, and I understand that is, that program is it in multiple countries, or did I read counties? I can't remember, but it's a huge initiative,
Yeah.
and the city of Clearwater's been I don't know, I'm just really proud of the city for what they've done on that program.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Greenprint 2.0 started quite a while ago, but I know
Yeah.
the city's been making strides to try and implement it over the
And
years.
I think they're the
so, yeah.
first to, the new building, the new city hall is gonna be compliant with that. And I think it's the first time that that's happened under this program for a public facility.
Good, excellent. All right. So, this is the last statutorily required incentive. So this is, number 11 was proximity to transportation, employment, and mixed-use developments. So the summary of this discussion here was that there were no specific issues with the city's current strategy. 11.1, that recommendation was continued with no change, and it was just that the city will maintain and implement the policies of the city's comprehensive plan that incentivize affordable housing development proximate to transportation hubs, major employment centers, and mixed-use developments. So that gets us through the first 11 incentive areas. So those are the ones required by Florida statute. So these subsequent incentive areas are the ones that have been added by the AHAC over the years. That is adaptive reuse is the first one. So there were no specific issues with the city's current strategy regarding this. This is just continuing to allow and promote adaptive reuse. So this is the reuse of properties in essentially either surplus or outmoded buildings, et cetera. So this was continued with no change. 13 was the land development code. Again, no specific issues with the city's current strategy. This is to continue to incentivize developers to address recommended design standards for affordable housing developments consistent with the community development code section referenced therein. And then 14 was communication and marketing of affordable housing. Again, no specific issues with the city's current strategy. 14.1 was also continued. This is regarding improving communication channels and marketing materials to reach different stakeholders interested in affordable housing. And then that was 14.1. And then 15 was financing. Again, no specific issues with the city's current strategies. This is just diversifying financial strategies to contribute to the construction and maintenance of affordable housing. And then 15.2 is the feasibility of reducing paying code violation liens on lots suitable for affordable housing development. So this is a continuation of the discussion we just had under a different recommendation. And then 15.3 is just ensuring adequate staffing levels to achieve these recommendations. And then 16 is partnerships. So this is the last AHAC initiated recommendation, but I will say it's probably the longest recommendation. If you've read this recommendation in full, it's got several bullets under it. There was a discussion, however, at the last meeting that maybe there was a need to emphasize the starting points for persons seeking affordable housing. So where does somebody go when they want to get information about affordable housing in the city? We talked about the city's existing affordable housing webpage, and then we also talked about Sunny, the city's chatbot as well. So with this particular recommendation, there was just one modification, and that was to add a bullet that directs persons seeking information about affordable housing development in the city of Clearwater to the city's affordable housing webpage, and then it provides the address for that, and that's really the starting point. Once you get to that web page, there's information both for developers of affordable housing and persons seeking affordable housing, so that once you get in there, you can kind of funnel direction-wise into the different information aspects and then find a contact person within the city to access additional information. So, so that was recommendation 16.1, and there were no other modifications other than that first bullet. So at this point, before we talk about the next meeting, I just want to basically open the discussion. Are there any, we didn't really talk about it at the last meeting, whether there are any new recommendations or different recommendations. We kind of focused on the existing recommendations that are in the report. If you recall back to some of the barriers and incentives that were identified at that first meeting on September 9th, do you feel that the recommendations that are included in the report and that have been modified, including those that have been modified, do you feel that those are addressing those barriers and incentives, or are there any other issues you'd like to talk about? Because this is really our last workshop meeting before we get into the public hearing. Yeah.
I'd like to go back to 13, the Land Development Code,
Uh-huh.
and recommend that they add accessibility. I did some research, and building accessible is relatively inexpensive on new construction, running from about 1.1 to 1.3% of the total project. If it's a rehabilitation project, it's a lot more expensive. But on new construction, it doesn't add to the cost, and it should be included in the Land Development Code that affordable housing, as well as any other that might be required, accessibility is an issue, I think.
Okay.
It's just not listed here.
Okay.
And aesthetic,
Yes, uh-huh.
oh, I'm sorry.
So this section of code actually sets forth requirements that are necessary in order to get the bonus. I would need to look into this because we have state legislation that prohibits us currently from making anything more restrictive without offsetting it. So I would need to look into the ability to actually implement something in the next year. I believe we're on hold until 2028 right now. Senate Bill 180, these are some of the unintended consequences of some of the recent legislation. So I think looking into how to do it might be appropriate, but it may not be something we could do as a requirement, in the near term.
I think there is some requirements as it applies to affordable housing, is it not?
But they're already in
community
place,
block
so,
grant, okay.
so because they preceded the legislation that went into effect this year, which was to ensure that cities didn't place moratoriums on development after the storms or make things more difficult for the replacement of and rebuilding of communities. It's just that the way it's written, it's very general and thus prohibits cities from from doing changes that could be perceived as more restrictive.
I got
But
Okay.
I believe last meeting, I mentioned that in the countywide rules, they've recognized the need for universal design and accessibility and have enabled bonuses. Something like that is a little bit different, but requires more effort to put into place. So sometimes you can set a new incentive, a new bonus, and have some standards that go with it, but we would not be able to amend our current bonus to add additional requirements, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm curious from Wade Trim's perspective, if you've seen anything throughout the state that is innovative or I guess innovative is the word I'll use, that is being offered by a municipality in terms of initiative.
Incentives, in terms of incentives. Right now, I think everything that we're kind of talking about in this is kind of what's out there in terms of menu right now. Density bonuses, accessory dwelling units, everybody's looking at alternative types of units or how to allow those or open the doors for those to come in. I'm trying to think. There's nothing that comes to my mind that's necessarily not covered in here in some dimension. So I think the city's doing a relatively good job of providing some of those things, the density bonuses, the expedited review process, all of that. But I think there's some work to be done as well in this. Some of these recommendations are already occurring, and some of them are kind of future wish list items, which are in process. And honestly, they just take time to implement, right? To figure out how that process could work, whether or not it's legally feasible, et cetera, to offer that. So I think that's where the city is right now. But in terms of that accessibility comment, just to put that, this particular recommendation has really two parts to it. One is the existing section 3-920, and then kind of the list under there on the other criteria could include but are not limited to are things that are not necessarily in that, but things that the committee's wanted to look at in the past. So what I'll do between now and our next meeting, and when we get those materials out to you, I'll meet with Lauren, and maybe we can look at a way to put that in as kind of a future wish list kind of item, but it may not be something that's implementable before Senate Bill 180 runs out, essentially. So, you know, there are some things that are preempted by the state, and we just have to keep those in mind as a requirement in here, whether or not we can put that in. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Under 13, under land development, it may apply elsewhere, I'm not sure, but in addition to accessibility, energy conservation or efficiency should be added, I think. There's other things that make a development, you know, safer, like a fencing and stuff like that, but I think efficiency and accessibility are more important than others, but there's a whole list of things you could add, but you know, playgrounds, for example, green space.
Yeah, and I know that energy and efficiency has come up frequently in the AHAC meetings over the years, and it's really, you know, twofold. Obviously, energy efficiency is good for the environment and the city overall, but at the same time, one of the major issues with affordable housing is just the cost of maintenance, utilities, et cetera. And if you can put energy efficient materials into that building, whether it's, you know, the windows or whether, you know, you're somehow reducing the cost of heating or cooling or whatever that ends up being for that particular resident, you're creating a more affordable living environment for them, essentially. So that's something that's been discussed on and off in the years, and I think that's why it appears in the vision statement as well, because energy efficiency is really in that vision statement also, so we can look at that too under this. Yeah.
I'd like to go back to 8.
Okay.
Modification of street requirements. I'm going to ask this question because I'm not familiar with all the laws, but if a developer comes forward with a project on a street that has no street lights, would the city not require that that street have lights or curbs and gutters or stormwater or anything? Because some of the streets that were built years and years ago don't have curbs.
Yeah,
You know?
I think in terms of street design, I think all the standard, and Lauren can correct me if I'm wrong, but all of the standards that would be applicable to street design would still be subject to that project. I think this particular standard is about reducing street widths and the design of the street in terms of traffic safety, and I think that was something the committee has always felt uncomfortable with, is really adjusting those safety parameters of the street. But I think in terms of lighting design, striping, you know, whether or not sidewalks are required, I think that's something that would be part of any development.
And parking, particularly if you have a narrow street, and some of the streets in Clearwater are more narrow than others, it's gonna halter the parking restrictions, you know, because you can't park on a narrow street, on both sides especially, because you can't get through the middle. So that has to be a consideration in affordable housing with reduced parking requirements.
I'm not sure what triggers, you know, at what scale of development do we look at when streetlights might be required or things like that. But our Public Works Department reviews all of these projects, and anything that would be standard, they would be requesting as part of this. I mean, changing curb and gutter is more of a larger scale change because of the stormwater system. You know, as we saw, most of our projects are individual homes, so they're not likely to trip the threshold for needing some of these new changes.
And the streets, they have to be maintained over time and resurfaced, and it's expensive, you know, to do that. Why not do it now and avoid having to do it 30 years from now? You know, at least do upgrade, modernize, and be prepared for the future.
I believe these, I believe these issues are, wow, okay, I'll say that. I just did a site development permit, and a lot of those issues are addressed in the site permitting process before the building permit is issued. So, I mean, they really do, the city does a great job, I've learned, in really making you update, you know, sewer, fire hydrant placement, lighting, sidewalks, all of it. And developers maybe don't like that so much because it really does make the project more expensive, which is a challenge to do affordable housing, while also, and I don't want to call it restrictive because it's not restrictive, but when they add all that cost to a development, it certainly does prohibit the the feasibility of a project, which is why I think, if I understand correctly from you last time, the city only has like 8 or 9 a year. If that, I think you said. Maybe I'm wrong, but.
And that's primarily single family, is it not?
I
Single-family
think so,
development.
but here's the challenge that we're faced with. We're trying to put rules on getting more affordable housing while simultaneously adding cost to the ability to do so. So trying to balance that, to me, is so challenging.
It's specifically in regards to, my recommendation is multifamily rather than single family. You know, when you're putting 100 units, and I don't know how, you know, park occupancy standards and so forth come into play, how many people are going to be living in that property, for how
Pinellas
long.
County, we're so landlocked, and especially I think Clearwater, there isn't room for 100-unit projects. Please, I could be dead wrong. I have no idea, but from what I keep hearing in general, it has to be small infill projects that are done in our area, especially in Clearwater. So putting restrictions on a general nature for the one-off 100-unit project is going to really restrict those infill projects that really are more relevant to our particular environment, to our particular jurisdiction, I think. Help me on that one.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, you know, I think the role of this particular document is to determine how to incentivize affordable housing. So where are you reducing those barriers? That's not to say, though, that safety shouldn't be a consideration. And I think that's one of the things that street modification, the modification of street requirement standard, I think that's what that's looking at. I think that was just one of those points where the committee wasn't willing to go quite that far with the incentivization, but you know, any way that you can reduce those barriers or reduce the cost for affordable housing developers, how can you do that while maintaining compatibility with the existing neighborhoods? Because as you mentioned, this is pretty much an infill
Community.
area, you know, you're really only looking at infill development, so that adds that layer of compatibility
And
concerns.
that's why I wanted to make sure we don't do too much to make this something where next year this committee has one application.
Right.
And it gets to the point where it's just unincentivized in a more macro perspective. It's a tough
That's a good
one.
point, yeah. Does anybody else have any other comments regarding incentives or incentives that aren't identified in this document, or anything that you feel wasn't discussed so far that you hope to get out of the committee this year in terms of results? Yeah. Oh, it looks like you were gonna say something. Looked like you were about to.
Thank you.
That pin click was not raising of his hand.
Anybody else? Okay. All right, well, if you think of anything between now and our next meeting, feel free to reach out to Dylan. Dylan can help facilitate the collection of comments between now and our next meeting. And although next meeting is a public hearing, that doesn't mean that we can't discuss things at the next meeting. So there'll be the opportunity to discuss as well. It's just at that point, we'll be getting towards actually approving a document at the next meeting. Any changes that are discussed at the next meeting, we can incorporate before it goes to city council. Just so you know, there's still that opportunity. It's just now we're in more of a workshop format for this. So I'm going to, let's see, our next meeting slide. All right, so our next meeting will be November 18th, same time here in council chambers. And again, we'll be in public hearing format. So we'll be presenting the draft document to you in its form, and any changes that we discussed today we'll go over again so that you understand those. In your agenda packet that you received for today's meeting, we provided you a rough draft of that document incorporating the changes that we went over today. So you can see how those look in the document. Again, we'll be adding a few more before our next meeting. That'll make it into the next packet of agenda materials, but at least you have the framework of what this document will look like on the 18th. And with that, Dylan, do you have any other comments related specifically to the local housing incentive strategy before we move on?
Just at one point, I don't know if I addressed this, but at one point it was mentioned our impact fee and permit fee subsidy. We do have a fund that we do subsidize, I think you asked about it, subsidize impact fee and permit fee. And last year it was a mandate from the board to utilize that fund more, and we have significantly more, so.
Good.
I think in that fund we have around 230,000.
And with that, I'll turn the meeting back over to the chair. Thank you, Chair.
Does anyone from the public wish to speak on to this item? If so, please step to the podium and you will have 3 minutes to speak. Seeing no one, Ms. Dubois, do we have any comments by email? I will now close the public comment period. Is there anyone here to speak on items not on today's agenda? If so, please step to the podium, state your name, and spell your last name for the record. You will have 3 minutes to speak on a subject that is not on today's agenda. Seeing no one come forward, there are no email comments. I will now close the public comment period, and I'd like to ask if there are any final comments from the committee members.
Just to confirm, the next meeting's at 9 a.m.? Because I don't see a time on here. So is it at 9 a.m. again?
Don't
It
worry,
is. Okay.
don't worry, that's part of my spiel. Lastly, I'd like to ask Dylan Mayu if he has anything to report to the committee.
I don't have any further updates at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next AHAC meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, November 18th at 9 a.m. And we are scheduled to be back in council chambers in the main library. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.